In this interview, we talk with Dr. Mandy LaGreca, who is actually my doctor. So I love her. She has so much information. She really understands diet and labs, and she can specifically look at what's going on in your body through the labs that she draws. And we can make conclusions about what you should eat, what you should avoid, how much exercise should you do. So this was a really helpful interview because we go through what all of that looks like and what is the foundation of health that most people are missing. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Mandy. I appreciate it. You're a doctor. Part of the reason, and you're my doctor, and part of the reason I chose you is because I feel like you're very intelligent, but you have that analytical side to you. So you really bring kind of a foundational, like, hey, here's your labs, here's all the things that you have a deficit in, here's what you need to grow in. And that's really helpful when you're looking at like optimization and somebody like me that just wants to live healthier, right?
Yeah.
But you have a history in effectively treating people with interstitial cystitis, but now you've broadened your approach to help people optimize. What led you down this road?
Well, I think it's important for you to understand a little history about me. Prior to being diagnosed with interstitial cystitis, IC, I was heavily involved in weight related issues because of my own struggles with weight. So before opening up IC Healer, I had a program called Natural Health Achiever, and I was helping with gut issues, hormone, weight, and it was mostly of a coaching program while I was obtaining my doctorate. And so the IC kind of just fell on my lap because of my own struggles trying to navigate my own healing. But prior to that, my interest was actually in weight, and I had digestive issues too. So I was seeing a lot of people like that. And so it's kind of like it kind of turned back around, and I'm back into that mainly because I'm getting more requests and inquiries from people who don't have IC who still want to utilize some of my tools and my skills. So that's pretty much how it happened.
Yeah, and I was kind of surprised initially when you said, "Oh yeah, I'm just doing IC." I think when we first met, and you've kind of grown more into the optimization. But I was like, man, I would really love to use you as a doctor, but it's only IC at this point. So I was glad when you kind of opened that up to more people, because I was like, I would really, because our first interview, I was just so captivated by what you did and how you did it, and we'll get into that. So, what's your philosophy when it comes to getting at the root cause of disease?
You may have heard this phrase before: test, don't guess, right? I say this to people, and I always use this analogy. I love using analogies. I'll say, would you ask your mechanic to fix your car without running a battery of tests to see what's wrong? So, I mean, honestly, Micah, it's a lot more than that. I think that's just one tool in the toolbox, but that's a big one. But it does involve, building a relationship with your patients, listening, spending time with them, showing empathy, being their partner in health, and shared decision making. I think that last one's really important: shared decision making, because I think a lot of times we go to a doctor and they write a script and they tell us this is what you're going to take, and there's no really back and forth dialogue. Like, why should I take this? Why are you giving me this? And in this situation, my philosophy is, let's work on together as a partnership. So, and also it involves a lot of time behind the scenes, studying your medical history, doing surveys and forms, which you're doing, and then the frequent coaching visits that you have afterwards. So.
So do the labs give a pretty comprehensive view of somebody's health, or is it more isolated to kind of one area? Or with these labs, are you really able to say, hey, here's where you're at and here's where we can get you to? And how does that affect people who are already healthy or might have a few things going on? And then what do they look like after they work with you?
Well, the labs are not diagnostic. So I just want to make sure I can differentiate the difference between being diagnosed for a specific pathology that maybe a doctor is looking for specific biomarkers, and we're looking for metabolic dysfunction. So areas that could be triggering your symptoms always come back to metabolic dysfunction in different pathways. So they're not diagnostic in that way where I'm going to say, oh, I see this, you have this disease. It's like, I see these imbalances and I can see why your tissues or your cells, it does boil down to cells. So your cells are not functioning or behaving. I call them behaving appropriately. And the cells make up tissues, tissues make up organs, organs make up organ systems, and organ systems make up the organism. So if you understand that hierarchy, you'll understand how, if we look at the imbalances metabolically and the cellular imbalances, and how downstream everything happens after that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the group of people that you love to work with the most? And then what is kind of the different groups of patients that you have, categorically speaking?
You mean like the symptom wise, or what do you mean?
Yeah, like why would somebody come see you typically? Like, who are your most common patients? What are you typically working with?
People who have basically run out of options with their doctors, really is where it comes down to. I think you have to understand there is I usually give people a scale, a disease scale. There's a scale on where would you like to be. And so there's 3 levels. There's the red zone, the green zone, and the blue zone. So I think most of us want to be in the blue zone. So when I say blue zone, I'm saying mental clarity, optimal body weight, energetic, heightened libido, really fast metabolism, really functioning on a high level. But a lot of people are, believe it or not, even young people in their teens and 20s are kind of hovering in this green zone, this indifference zone, which is like fatigue, eczema, insomnia, skin rashes, migraines, brain fog, obesity, bloating, poor libido, joint pain. But then the people start to creep into the red zone as the disease process pursues, and that's cancer, autoimmunity, arthritis, IBS, Crohn's disease, depression, fibromyalgia, diabetes. So you're already in a disease. I like to catch people when they're in the green. So when you ask me who I really like to work with, I really want to work with people who are in the green, who are in that kind of hovering in that I don't feel too good, or I've got fatigue, I've got eczema, I need help. Because by the time they get into the red, it's really hard to reverse. I mean, I'm going to say you can't, but it's much more difficult. And they're more difficult people to work with because they're in so much pain. So if I could just grab everyone in the green zone and start working with them, that'd be great. But the problem is people in the green don't normally seek help. They're usually in the red because that's when they hit rock bottom and that's when they're seeking help. So if we can kind of communicate, maybe together, with the people we talk to, that, hey, if you're having symptoms, your body's telling you something's wrong, get help now before it becomes, I don't want to say the point of no return, but it becomes, more difficult to reverse.
Yeah, I think people just put things off until it becomes a big enough pain point that it's inconveniencing like a lot of stuff they're doing.
Exactly.
Rather than like with a little bit of insomnia where you're not sleeping well 3-4 nights out of the week, you can kind of deal with, you can push through it. Life is busy, and I'm actually seeing you because I've had fatigue and just some other stuff this last year. I kind of let my health go to the side as I, have 4 kids and a business that I'm running. So I'm super, super busy right now, just with life. But it's one of those things that you can't afford not to do, right?
Yeah.
If you want to be productive and you want to stay healthy for a long period of time, you have to focus on it. It just has to be a non-negotiable priority, I think, for really everybody. And that's going to result in you being able to do more. I mean, being healthy is going to make you more productive.
Oh, I wanted to mention, so when I said run out of options, generally it means that they've kind of done everything that they can, either with medicine or trying to figure it out on their own, navigating their health. And they've just reached the point where, like, I can't figure this out. I need somebody else. They don't want to take medications. They don't want the side effects, and they want to do it naturally. So those are the people who usually seek my care.
How often would you say doctors are giving labs and really doing the deep dive into what's happening on a molecular level or a cellular level like you are doing?
It depends on the type of doctor we're talking about. So if you're talking about more of like your conventional, large practice, your I hate to say this, but your insurance covered practice. If
Right.
you're like using your insurance to go and do your $25 copay visit and it's a 7-minute visit, you're probably not getting that. But if you're going to a functional medicine doctor who has it set up, maybe they have a nutritionist on staff, or maybe that's kind of, they built it into their fees, then in that case, functional medicine doctors, naturopathic doctors, other CNSs like myself, nutritionists or higher level doctorate level nutritionists. So I can't give you a percentage of how many that is. I don't think there's a lot, but I do think it's growing.
Yeah, I think labs are just kind of like it's like looking at a big Excel sheet of a lot of things to do. It's not very fun for doctors to do, so it gets put
I
to
love
the
it.
side. I know you do. That's why I chose you.
Yeah, I love it. I love the biochemistry behind all of it. But you
Yeah.
know what? It does require time. I mean, there's been times where if I get something really complicated and someone's run like 4 or 5 different labs, I might have spent 12 hours, just researching everything, just because sometimes you find things, like, oh, I've never seen this pattern before. Because there are patterns. They're patterns. It's not just one biomarker and you're like, oh, this is this. No, you have to look at them kind of in totality, like how they're affecting each other. And even in blood chem alone, there's a bunch of different markers and different patterns mean different things.
Well, and I understand you personally use a lot of this stuff And these labs, you were even showing me something recently, and you said you had some sort of flare up or something that you were working with, and then you looked at your labs and then you started to work back. What does that look like for you when you're using it personally, and how has that affected the work you do?
Oh, almost everything with at least with IC and also weight related, because those are the two things I struggled. I'm using my own lens of my own struggles. So, I mean, you have to understand when you have a condition, it does broaden your lens to the point where you're going to look at things that other people might miss. And so I definitely have noticed that, like with myself, I see a lot of the same patterns that I see with the people that I work with. One big one is the oxalate piece with the bladder, and then how a lot of us have that elevated oxalates that can be captured on urine, not always, but can be. And I see it about 80% of the time with people who run either the OAT or the NutriVal. We see the oxalate markers are usually elevated in about 80%, and myself included. But then I see a lot of oxidative stress markers, and I see a lot of the same patterns with nutrient deficiencies. So it kind of validates what I'm doing.
Can you give me an oxalate crash course? Because I see the word
Yeah.
around a lot, but I haven't really looked into it personally. I know people say don't eat kale now.
It depends on the type of kale.
Okay, let's get into it.
Okay, so oxalates are little crystals. They're anti-nutrients and they're found in plant foods. And they're really actually there because they're deterring insects from eating the plant. So they're part of their natural, structure. You know, think about like the thing is, because they're crystals, they can embed in your tissue and they can cause a lot of pain. They can shred your mitochondria. They can hijack your minerals. They can hijack your sulfation pathway, which you need for detox. And in the case of IC, when you pee them out, they really hurt because it's like little glass. We actually can see them in a microscope. They look like little pieces of crystals. So if you
Hmm.
Google oxalate crystals in a microscope, just Google it, you'll see they're tiny. Now, traditionally, oxalates have been associated with kidney stones. Okay, so they're one of the causes, calcium oxalates, but there's other kinds of oxalates, but the big one that we usually refer to as calcium oxalates, and urologists typically associate them with kidney stones. They have never associated them with any other condition, but in the last 10 years, we've identified that oxalates can promote inflammasome activation and also mast cells to produce histamine. So there are a strong correlation to oxalates and allergic types of responses associated with histamine. So if someone has eczema or skin issues, or I'm working with a guy right now who does not have IC, but he's got really bad skin issues, I trace that back to oxalates. He said his flare-up started after he did a lot of ginger juicing. So ginger is high in oxalates. So again, so they're in plants. Here's the thing most people don't know. Your body can produce oxalates endogenously as part of your biochemistry. So it's not just in plant foods. In fact, I hate to say this because I think the people listening who are on the oxalate side of things are going to say she's not right, but I've done my research. 60% of oxalates are endogenous. Only 40% are coming from your diet. And so knowing that, you have to understand how these labs help, because I can look into somebody's biochemistry using labs to find out, well, what's tipping off their metabolism and why are they producing so many oxalates, or your microbiome, because yeast and mold also are associated with oxalates. Too much protein in the diet can indirectly produce oxalates. Collagen, for example. Too much vitamin C can jack up oxalates. So if people are taking like 3-4 grams of vitamin C to prevent COVID, they might be actually promoting inflammasome activation due to oxalates. So they're a problem, and they're finally starting to get the attention that they deserve. I don't think Western medicine has associated them with anything else besides kidney stones yet, but they're starting to emerge as a very potential cause of a lot of diseases like arthritis, autoimmunity, and even cancer. There's been some reports of oxalates found in breast tissue of breast cancer patients.
So hearing all this stuff, and I'm doing these interviews for the summit, so I'm having a lot of different conversations with a lot of experts in a lot of fields, and people have a lot of very valuable insight, but it a little bit makes it feel like everything's going to kill you. Because we're just you're telling me like, don't drink ginger, don't overdo vitamin C, but that's probably not exactly what you're saying. I think it, if I had to guess, more goes back to like using your labs to determine what your diet needs to look like, and kind of doing that on a regular basis if you want to live optimally. I don't know, can you expound on that, because there's just so many things out there, especially with nutrition, that make it a little bit confusing. Like, how do we really dial in our nutrition?
If you go onto the American Nutrition Association website, they're strongly promoting the phrase personalized nutrition. I think we're coming to really appreciate this term because nutrition is personal. It's not cookie cutter. We're no longer looking at those fad diets that we looked at in the 90s and the early 2000s, like Atkins diet and ketogenic diet and carnivore diet and, all that. I think we're starting to really appreciate the fact that your diet is personal to you. And with all the tools that we have now, not just the lab testing I just talked to you about, but even nutrigenomics testing with like your genetics, we can really dial down what diet is good for you. And it's really nice because it really alleviates the stress of not knowing. Because I personally remember when I was younger and I was like working out with my friends and they were doing this bodybuilding diet and I tried to do it with them, I did not get the same response that they did on that diet. I felt horrible on that bodybuilding diet, bloated, and I put on weight. And now looking back, I realized that was the wrong diet for me. And so when we use some of these tools, like for example, in oxalates are not going to be a problem for everyone, but it's the extent of how bad they are. So example, I think oxalates are inflammatory to everybody. So I don't think anyone should be juicing like loads and loads and loads of spinach. Let's just put it that. Okay, just put it there. Nobody should be juicing loads and loads of spinach, but some people can handle more oxalates than others. Just going back to the oxalate example, that varies depending on your genetics, your microbiome, your nutrient status, your health history. How were you born? Were you a C-section? Were you vaginal? Were you breastfed? Did you take a lot of antibiotics as a child? So there's a lot in dieting. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, how you eat, which when I say the word diet, I mean how you eat, not weight loss dieting. So people shouldn't be afraid that everything's bad for you. I think when you find out what your diet is for you, it's a little bit liberating because then you'll realize that these are the foods that are good for me and these are the foods that are not so good for me. And then you'll create a diet that revolves around that.
Is there a way to figure it out without doing labs? Let's say somebody doesn't have any money to spend, but they can at least afford a base diet that's going to be moderately healthy. Is there a way to kind of, and of course I would recommend doing labs with you because I think that's just the way to go. You're going to get in great detail what to avoid, even foods you haven't even tried yet, probably. And you're just like, hey, that's not on the list. But yeah, for other people, let's say, I don't know, because it seems like, people have been around for a long time. That we could kind of dial in like, hey, this is human biology does well with this, but I don't understand the rest of that on why it has to be so personalized. So yeah, I guess.
Well, we've changed a lot. We have our I think the industrial revolution has really changed a lot of things for us. So even though we're seeing a decline in we're seeing longevity in that people are living longer. So they're not literally dying from these infections that maybe our ancestors died from, at like 30, but we're living longer, but we're living a lower quality of life because we're getting these degenerative diseases. And so, through the process of advanced technology with, our lifestyles are easier, right? I mean, we've got, computers, we've got cars, we're not as active, we're not exposed to nature as much. So that's kind of been a plus as far as, living longer, but then we're exposed to a lot more toxicity and we're missing out on nature. So to answer your question, there's different levels of optimization. So to answer your question, first of all, let's understand that we're no longer in the 1800s. This is the new way of life. And we've got things like even our building materials have changed, right? What houses are made out of, right? So we have a lot of that. We have cell phones, we have EMFs, we have toxins like pesticides, we have plastics. You know what I mean? So now that we're in this situation, we have to deal with what we've got. So if someone doesn't have any money and they want to optimize, let's look at different levels of optimization. So at a very basic level of optimization, level 1, you should cut out junk food, soda, sugar. I mean, this is basic stuff, but sometimes people don't even know this. So it's important for them to know. Let's sweat and let's exercise until we sweat. Sweat you actually release more toxins. You excrete more toxins in your sweat than you do in your stool and your urine. Did you know that? More comes out. Yeah. So more, that's why people do saunas, but you don't have to use a sauna. You can just put on a lot of clothing and work out until you sweat. So that's something that they can do. Fasting, intermittent fasting. I think people eat too much and they're eating around the clock, and our ancestors haven't done that. And I don't think we've evolved in order to be able to constantly eat. So intermittent fasting can be something very affordable, right? And actually it's better good for on your finances because
Yeah.
you're not eating. Right? Let's see, other things they can do. Slow down the speed that you're eating. Slow down, chew 20 to 30 times before you swallow, because you have to release the digestive enzymes that start in the mouth. So we have to chew our food. We inhale our food in this modern society, right? Constantly
I
rushing.
do.
Four
I
kids
feel
at
like
home.
you're looking at me when you're saying that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is the thing. You have 4 kids, and I guarantee
Yeah.
you're probably stressed when you're eating. And in reality, you have to be sitting down and relaxed because you want your digestive processes to be able to handle the food that's about to come in. So that's something that they can do. And then get a really good protein powder. Like a really good protein powder that has all of the essential amino acids, because I don't think people get enough protein in their diet. And I also think that people don't digest protein properly. So the protein needs are a bit higher. Here's another one: a tall glass of water before you eat. So just big tall glass of water before you start eating. It serves 2 purposes. 1, it stimulates your digestive enzymes. 2, it fills up your belly and you're less likely to overeat.
Yeah. So for protein powder, we could probably link one below. Do you have any recommendations?
Well, I'm plant-based protein right now because of the whole dairy link to inflammation. So I actually use this one. Yeah, I can recommend a few plant-based ones afterwards if you want, that we can link below.
Okay. Yeah, we'll
Yep.
just link it below.
Yep.
So you said that's kind of like level 1 of optimization. Now take me into whatever the next level would be and what that would look like with these labs and what we would be getting from that.
Okay. Well, level 2 would be supplements, right? I mean, even
Okay.
before you do labs, multivitamin, like just a basic multivitamin. You'd be surprised how one little multivitamin can go a long way. I would say fiber supplements are good too. So if you're going to do supplements, fiber to promote good microbiome, a multivitamin, and binders. Binders would be really good because we're in such a toxic world that taking binders like charcoal, zeolite, not very expensive. You can get a bottle of that for like $20. Binders before you go to bed. So that's like level 2. And then, because that's going to involve a little bit more finances and spending. And then the level 3 would be like basic labs. Like I would say a hair tissue mineral analysis would be one, because it's not very expensive. It's not very invasive, but it gives me a lot of information.
Mm-hmm.
It could tell you your oxidation rate, if you're a slow oxidizer or a fast oxidizer. And just knowing that alone, there's so many hacks you can do just knowing your oxidation rate.
So what are areas that you typically see that people, so the labs you showed me, essentially there's the red zone and then I think it goes yellow and then green. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
there's like 200 different
Yeah.
things that you're looking at. So what are the areas that you're most commonly seeing people deficient in? And then what do you do to resolve that?
Mitochondrial markers are the big ones. And then also the detoxification markers, and also the microbiome, the dysbiosis markers. So let's just say you see a bunch of different mitochondrial markers. Well, a lot of these are enzymatic pathways. They're enzyme control pathways that have nutrient cofactors. So you can actually look and cross-check the mitochondrial markers with some of the nutrient markers and kind of decide, could this metabolic mitochondrial pathway be off because they're lacking in certain nutrients? And so like a lot of it's like B vitamins. That's a big one. All of our Bs are generally relatively low. And I have a variety of reasons why. I think one, we're not getting enough in our food, but I think we're using up a lot of our Bs because of stress and oxidative stress. I think we're just using them up. So we have our supplemental needs, or our needs are higher than the RDA as a result of that.
Is there a way to eat like a really good diet and still get all the nutrients that you need? Or are you generally seeing that you have to supplement?
If you can grow your own food and kill your own animals and make sure it's fresh and don't overcook it. And yes, you absolutely can. I think one of the best ways to get a lot of nutrients is from organ meats, like grass-fed organ meats, like kidney, liver. You can get so much out of just that. Oysters. But again, it does require the ability to have access to stuff and cooking them and not overcooking them. I think in our busy world, most people don't have that ability. And so we overcook things, or we're just eating on the go. And so that's how supplements come into play. Plus we have digestive issues that people aren't absorbing them properly.
Yeah. And I know you've hit on like the industrialization kind of changed agriculture and now our food has essentially changed. Can you go into that a little bit?
Well, the soil quality is no longer as rich as it used to be. And there's, pesticides and herbicides that are interfering. So, and I think also it's not fresh. I mean, if you're getting something from South America, by the time it gets to us, it does lose about, I don't remember what the percentage was, maybe 40% of its nutrient content by the time it gets on your plate, and then you cook it and then you're killing it that way too. So, I mean, it's a combination of everything.
Yeah, that's wild. I've heard even like freezing food can greatly deteriorate their nutrient density and things like that. So, but I don't think it's super realistic for me to start hunting. And I mean, I do a little bit, but I'm not going to go out and do that for all my food for my entire family. So it doesn't seem super realistic.
Well, if you can find a local farmer nearby who might have, or like we found somebody not too far from here that has cows, that they kill cows, and we just get a fresh cow, and we'll get, we have to freeze some of it. But I tell you what, Micah, when you get a fresh cow that was literally just slaughtered the day before, the flavor is amazing. I couldn't believe it.
Just the way you said that threw me off. You look a little too excited about it. But yeah, I know what you mean. We do the exact same thing, and it ends up being cheaper than buying it at the store because you're getting I don't know what it is, like $4 a pound, and that's including ground meat and the steaks and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's delicious, and the color is amazing.
Yeah, for sure. So what are the symptoms people generally don't think about that they should address early on? So I know you kind of mentioned insomnia and some other stuff, but what are the things that you commonly see that you're like, that's kind of time to start taking a deeper look at that?
Fatigue, brain fog. Brain fog is a big one. Being forgetful. Insomnia, of course, bloating. I suffered with bloating since I was like 19. Chronic bloating. I used to have like a different pair of pants before my menstrual cycle because I knew I was going to bloat up. So I'd have two different sizes. That's not normal. If the women who are listening, you shouldn't bloat during your menstrual cycle like that. Cramping, even for women, like this, like really bad PMS and cramping, mood swings, depression. Like this, they say, oh, I have seasonal affective disorder, or I'm depressed, I have the blues. I don't think that's normal. I think that's your body's way of saying there's something not right.
Yeah. Yeah. And those are super common. I don't feel like I've had a lot of brain fog, but yeah, a lot of the reason I started working with you, a bit of fatigue and a bit of bloating, but it's not significant, but it's one of those things where it's like, well, I may as well address this now because it's just going to save me time and money down the road anyway. So it's much better
You're
to do
smart.
right.
I wish I had somebody like myself in my life when I was younger, because I swept a lot of things under the rug. And I was one of those who waited until the pain was too much before I did anything. And I think a lot of people do.
And it's wonderful how accessible it is now. Cause like, I mean, we just do it over Zoom, and then you send me some lab stuff, and then I just go somewhere locally and I get like the same as if we're doing it in person.
Yeah.
One of the questions I have on here is I've heard you mention about nutritional deficiency and inefficiency. I didn't really understand what you meant by that. So could you explain that?
Yeah, I think when we think about nutrition deficiencies, actually the technical term of it would be like a full-blown deficiency, like scurvy, pellagra, or like some kind of disease that's caused by a nutrient. Beriberi, like that'll be like B1. So that's an actual deficiency. I think what we're dealing with is insufficiency. So we don't have enough nutrients for optimal enzymatic functioning. So a deficiency would actually could create a disease. Like we know scurvy, right? Like the sailors who had like the scurvy and they found out it was vitamin C deficiency. You probably heard that story.
Yep.
Most people these days don't have that. They may have symptoms though that are due to insufficiency. For example, if you have a B1 insufficiency, you might have depression or memory loss, or you might have some issues with your weights. One I see a lot is riboflavin, B2. You'll have like skin issues, or ever see like the corners of the mouth where the people have these little cracks in the corner of their mouth. Mm-hmm. That could be riboflavin. That could also be niacin as well. B6 would be depression and fatigue. So like having an insufficiency can have symptoms, but not necessarily something that you would diagnose as a deficiency. Does that make sense? Insufficiency and deficiency are different levels.
Yeah, it does. And like you said, it's not popping up like those infections or those like really severe diseases that we used to get, but it's degenerative in that it's going to progress, it's going to get worse, and it's going to last for a long time and cause a lot of pain. along the way. So that makes sense to me. But I also know that you have used a lot of different tools. I know that you've used ozone, but could you talk about how you've kind of fit that into your practice and why you supplement this foundation of nutrition and lifestyle with like tools and whatever you want to call them, whether it's biohacks or interventions or medical therapies? What are those and why do you use them?
So ozone, FSM is something I really like. I have a device of my own. I have a PEMF device as well. I also have a sauna, and I want to get a beamer. That's next on my list. So those are the main ones that I've used. And then of course, fasting, which is not really a device, but it's a hack. Because it takes multiple things to actually help. It's not just like, you can't just expect the diet is going to, and exercising too. You can't just expect just a diet to heal everything. I think in some cases you just kind of need the combination of everything. In my case, ozone was really important because I had a lot of infections and the nutrition piece of it wasn't ramping my immune system enough for my body to fight it on its own. It was, the infections were too much. So I needed the ozone to help lower my infectious load and reduce my oxidative stress levels and ramp up my immune system. And I think sometimes when you use some of these tools, it gives your immune system a chance to catch up. Because we think about all this stuff, you got mold toxicity, candida overgrowth, you got, oxidative stress from this and that, and all this toxicity, and your immune system's like shot. And so you can't just expect some vitamin D or vitamin C to solve that. So, sometimes these tools just kind of put the, like, it's almost like an ignition. It lights up the flame a little bit and helps things work better.
Sure, that makes sense. I've seen people ask or have had the question a number of times, or people comment that, like, hey, I'm high in oxidative stress because I do some sort of testing. And then that deters them from ozone because it's an oxidative therapy. But could you elaborate how it actually helps with oxidative stress, or at least some of the experiences that you've seen on what it does to the labs?
Well, I personally have noticed that the oxidative piece of it is really short. Like, you're only getting it for like and you can correct me because you know more about this ozone mechanism than I do. It's not doing it long term. I think because it switches over to oxygen. I think that piece of it is what's supporting the immune system and helping reduce inflammation. So I personally have noticed if I do ozone by itself at a high dose, yeah, I'll definitely feel like for a little while, a little bit more inflamed, but it quickly goes away. So, I mean, personally for me, I feel like if someone's really concerned about that, they can actually do it with glutathione and like on the IV. So like you can actually do the ozone along with glutathione. And that's what I did in the beginning. I did the ozone and the glutathione together and I had no problems. I mean, I feel like the benefits of ozone outweigh the downsides of the oxidative piece. But here's one thing I will say. Think that it's all dependent on the concentration. So if you are already very, very high in oxidative stress, you might not want to go in there with this super high concentration of ozone.
Yeah.
Like, start really low. And that's what I did. I started with, actually, I didn't even do the IV right off the bat. I did RI, I did rectal, and then I did the minor auto hemotherapy before I even went to major. And so that would be the way to kind of train your body to be able to tolerate it better. Plus, you can take antioxidants too. Like, so maybe, a better approach would be to like spend a few months doing some antioxidant therapies before embarking into ozone.
People, I'm just kind of curious now with your experience and what you see with oxidative stress. People that are hot, like let's say they're pretty high in oxidative stress, do they get a pretty bad reaction when they do other oxidative things or things that stress it out a little bit? Like if they do a severe exercise or an extreme exercise, would that put them in a state that's even worse? Or what would it do, I guess?
Yeah, I have a very high intensity exercise. It can promote some inflammation as well. Is not recommended for someone who's extremely high in oxidative stress. I think there's a hormesis effect. Like, I think everyone has to do what's the right dosing that's right for them. It's like that. There's a tipping point for everybody. So I think. But I do also think that over time, when you add a little bit more at a time, your body does get used to it. So I mean, I would say that if you are concerned and your labs come back high in oxidative stress and you have all the classic symptoms of someone who has oxidative stress, you don't want to jump into something that's going to promote oxidative stress aggressively. Even vitamin C, high dose vitamin C can promote oxidative stress too. That's kind of how it works. Probably not a good idea for those people. That would be, micro dosing. I think even with exercise, I found that like interval training is fabulous And HIIT training is fabulous, but for someone who's really, really inflamed or has a lot of oxidative stress, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, not the full 20-minute interval class, do
Yeah.
2 minutes and gradually build up from there.
So what do you do for exercise? What have you adopted based on, 'cause I'm guessing that you base a lot of what you do around the work that you do and like the different labs, because I've heard you talk about it. Have you taken a certain form of exercise because it makes your labs look better, makes you healthier, or do you just do what you like? Can you go into that a little bit?
So prior to doing all this, I was a fitness trainer
Yeah.
and I was a fitness instructor, and I still am, but I teach spin classes now, but I don't teach them 5 days a week any longer. That was going back to that oxidative stress. That was promoting too much oxidative stress in my body. So I've kind of, I know you've heard of Dr. Jay Teta. He's the metabolic effect guy. Love him. I've adopted his mentality and his philosophy of less is more. So
Mhm.
he says, especially as women are getting older, like we have to do less than more because too much can promote cortisol, and it can also stimulate belly fat because of the cortisol effect. So I've over time have really adopted that. So what I do is I do interval training, and I teach classes too on Zoom twice a week. And we do full body weights, a little bit of like HIIT in between. Sometimes we'll do Tabata. I don't know if you've ever heard of Tabata, 20 seconds on, 10
Yeah,
seconds off.
I really like Tabata.
I love it. Yep. And we'll do interval training for about 15, maybe 30 minutes. And then I walk, 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 walk. And the purpose of walking isn't to burn calories, it's to lower cortisol. It's to help with all of that, cortisol induced belly fat. And so that's kind of been, I do my spin class once a week now instead of 5 days a week. And it's my one day where I just allow myself to go really, really hard and really high intensity. And I enjoy it because I love having my full class.
Yeah. That's great. Well, that kind of wraps up a lot of the questions I had. I know we got into nutrition and kind of what you're doing on the lab side. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking about getting a doctor, you're an idiot not to choose Mandy if you choose somebody else. And I'm not trying to be rude to anybody else, but she's just that good. And I've been super happy with her. So I think if you're listening, and I know you don't like me saying this in front of everybody, but I am. So I think you should choose Mandy if you're going to get a doc. So where can people find you? Do you have some extra resources that you can give people just so that it can kind of get started with some of the things that we talked about today?
Yeah. So if you have IC and you're listening, it's ichealer.com. So you can go in and download my free ebook. I also started a new one called Viva Immune. The purpose of this actually was last year because I realized that people really needed education on COVID, and they needed education on their immune system and how to optimize their immune system so that in the case that they get COVID, they're not going to like completely go crazy. I don't know if you know that there's actually a strong association with COVID and mast cell activation. And so if someone has mast cell activation syndrome and they get COVID, they're going to have a lot of more problems than someone who doesn't. And so I wanted to educate people. So that's Viva Immune, and all the same labs that I offer are with Viva Immune. It's actually, if you look at the two websites, they're actually replicas of each other, but one's for Viva Immune and the other one's for IC Healer. So you can go either way. And I have ebooks for both of them. So
Yeah, and we'll have those here in the summit. So that's great. And you have an Instagram too, right?
yeah, so my Instagram is Dr. Mandy DCN.
Well, thank you so much, Mandy. I really appreciate it. You have a lot of great insight, and I hope that a lot more people will come and see you on telemedicine because of this.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's been fun.